The city and province faced off in court today over controversial Bill 5. That's the legislation passed earlier this month that cuts the number of city council seats by nearly half. Now, this court proceeding started at 10 a.m. this morning, and at this hour, they're still inside. The judge is hearing from about 21 lawyers seated in front of him, and it's a packed courtroom in there. About 300 seats available. Dozens of councillors as well as residents showed up to have their voice heard.
Is anti-democratic, and we know that Ford is acting out of self-interest for his insider friends, and this is really, at the end of the day, revenge against the City of Toronto, against the people of Toronto that rejected him before.
The actions of the government were discriminatory, that the people of Toronto have been treated differently. I think the other charter arguments were strong.
Everybody I speak to at the doorstep, this is on their minds. They truly believe that the provincial government overstepped, that in the middle of an election they changed the rules, and that any school kid going back to school next week knows that on the playground the rules are the rules and you don't change them in the middle of the game.
That this will have a devastating impact on racialized communities and women who to date do not enjoy representation at City Hall. We only have one woman of color at City Hall, Kristen Wong-Tam, and that's it. And as a result of Bill 5, there will be a disproportionate impact on minorities, women, working class people.
Process really matters. Democracy is all about process, and that the way this happened has created a significant issue for Torontonians. And in the event that a change comes forward, we'll have to look at ways that we can strengthen the local democracy in this city, because representation matters. The best things that happen in this city happen because Torontonians are engaged with their energy and their passion and their enthusiasm in city building.
We're here to represent taxpayers who are going to be saving $25.5 million by a reduced city council, and that's just the savings to start. So you're not entitled to a position as a city councillor. You're not entitled to that position either under the Constitution or the Charter.
The province argues that the changes to, quote, achieve greater voter parity and make council more effective, saving taxpayers money. Premier Doug Ford announced the bill on July 27th, 3 months before October's municipal elections. And we won't be hearing a decision here today. The judge says he needs time to review the arguments made by all sides. He actually has to leave with a couple boxes of documents prepared for him by these lawyers. He says he expects to have a decision before September 11th. Now, in addition to politicians, there were also many lawyers here today, and they had a lot to say ahead on City News. The surprising legal implications that lawyers say could leave taxpayers shelling out even more money for more court battles. It was the city versus the province here today inside the University Courthouse. The City of Toronto challenging provincial legislation that would cut the number of city council seats, from 47 to 25. Now, this proceeding started at 10 a.m. this morning. Right now, it's wrapping up, and right now, all you see are some of these candidates or some of the people who challenged this legislation, and they're basically saying that regardless of what happens, it's good to have these conversations, and it's good to know under law what the province can and can't do. And something that lawyers for the city said today is that this bill is undemocratic, and if Premier Doug Ford does have his way, then that could leave taxpayers vulnerable and on the hook for future legal challenges.
As it stands now, if I do not refile by September 14th, what effectively that means is when I registered on July 27th, it was meaningless. And that's not how an election is run in a free and democratic society, particularly one as developed as our country that's been holding democratic elections for as long as Canada has been. The city has said that Bill 5 will make this election illegitimate. That's what the city has said. So if we are unsuccessful and a candidate was to make an application to the court and say that they participated in an unfair election, it would be somewhat hypocritical, and not hypocritical, not to use that term, but it'll be confounding, to say the least, to have the city come argue that your process was indeed fair if on today's date you're arguing that as it stands, if Bill 5 stands, it will not be a fair election.
The government introduced this bill 3 months into the campaign. They passed it in just over 2 weeks. So frankly, while the Crown says changing back midstream would now be too problematic and expensive, I don't think it lies with the Crown to argue that a change in the middle of election is too complicated or expensive when they instituted this change in the middle of election, complicating and increasing the expense of the election.
And the province, on the other hand, says that this bill can save taxpayers millions. Now, someone who was supposed to be speaking at the hearing today is a lawyer for the TDSB. However, the province's lawyer intervened and said that asked the judge to park this conversation for another day. The judge agreed, but promised the TDSB's lawyer that they will have the conversation and hear their arguments down the line. Now, a decision is not coming in today. The judge says there's just too much to consider, and he says he wants time to look over all the arguments. He says he's expecting to deliver a decision before September 11th.